Good news is there are effective solutions to clean up the system of freight transport. And my guest today, Christine Cordero from the Center for Environmental Health, is here to enlighten us about this issue. Christine is CEH's Environmental Health and Justice Coordinator and recently returned from a trip to Washington, D.C., where she went to educate and advocate members of Congress on the need for a change in trucking industry regulations that would enable 87 million Americans to breathe cleaner air while keeping thousands of truck drivers employed. Welcome to Your Supernatural Life, Christine.
Hello, Beth. Thanks for having me on.
Great. So tell us a little bit about what CEH does, Center for Environmental Health. I know it's a great organization.
Mm-hmm. The Center for Environmental Health is about a 12-year organization. We're based in Oakland, California, but we do nationwide work around protecting children and families from toxic exposures, primarily in products, but also from manufacturing processes.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the hidden costs of the things we buy when we buy imported products in big warehouse stores.
Mm-hmm. It's like what you talked about, Beth, your printer that traveled from Korea, that was made in Korea and traveled from China onto a ship. So all the products that we buy, like Q-tips, books, DVDs, printers, computers, most of these things, unfortunately, because of the manufacturing processes and all of these things being manufactured outside of our country, are put on all of these different modes of transportation that are primarily run on diesel fuel, are put on all of these modes of transportation, travel from all of these different countries into different ports around the country. So there's Seattle, Tacoma, Oakland, Los Angeles, Long Beach, New York, New Jersey, and Miami. All of these products come in at these different ports of call. They travel, like you said, on rail, by train, by plane to these different distribution warehouses, go to these different stores, and that's then where you buy it. So the hidden cost is on these different modes of transportation. Each of those vehicles, they spout fumes of smoke, and these smoke have all these different particles that end up when you smell it, and we've all been by freeways and you smell that smoke. Anything that you smell means it's already gotten in your lungs.
Well, how is diesel fuel actually different from the gasoline we're putting in our cars?
Mm-hmm. So diesel fuel has something that it goes into really tiny particles called diesel particulate matter, and these pieces of particles are even smaller than a fraction of a width of a hair. And these particles are so small they get deeply embedded into your lungs, and actually they hinder your lung capacity. And we've known that this has actually both exacerbated and caused asthma and other respiratory disease.
Oh, that's interesting. So that doesn't sound very healthy to be living near the freeways that the trucks are traveling. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about all this. This is not just the printer; it's all the products that. Yeah. Paper towels, Q-tips, nail polish remover, DVDs, CDs, books, even vegetables and fruits that go on the trucks. Any of those big trucks that you see with the containers more than 2 or 3 axles. Those big trucks that you see you see all over the freeway. Those are the ones that actually use the diesel fuel and that soot that comes out of the tailpipes. When the kids on the buses, they ask the truck drivers, they pump their arm, and ask them to do that. The soot that comes out of the pipe, those are what ends up in the lungs and actually, makes our lungs fight harder to breathe. So are there alternatives to diesel fuel?
There are alternatives to diesel fuel. There are both better engines and better fuel traps that trap this particulate matter so that less of it gets in the air. There's also better fuel technologies like natural gas that puts out less toxic emissions into the air. So there are definitely better technologies that we could use.
So it sounds like it's expensive, though, to reformulate the engines, let's say, or to put in these traps.
Yes, it is definitely very expensive. A diesel retrofit engine probably costs anywhere in the neighborhood of $20,000, $25,000 per truck.
And who's paying for that?
Right now, unfortunately, because of how the industry works, you have low-wage immigrant drivers paying for those.
And how do they afford that?
They don't, unfortunately. Right now, each driver that drives those trucks that you see out there are classified as their own little company. And according to a recent study by the Pacific Institute and the East Bay Alliance for Sustainable Economy in Oakland, they did a study on the Oakland port truck drivers, and they found that after equipment and gas, that each of these drivers were bringing home approximately $30,000 a year after expenses and all that. So you can imagine that they can't pay for these diesel retrofits for their trucks. And so what's happening is that they're taking out these horrible loans for these diesel retrofits if they're getting them at all, or they're not getting it, or they're not, they're out of work.
And what would motivate the drivers to actually do the retrofits?
So actually in California, we're very lucky that we have incredible standards by the California Air Resources Board to improve the diesel trucks in this state. Unfortunately, the burden is falling on these low-wage truck drivers, so a lot of them are either being put out to work or on these very, very bad loans, and we're finding that the costs for maintaining these retrofits are incredibly expensive.
If you're just joining us, I'm Beth Greer. This is Your Supernatural Life, and I'm speaking with Christine Cordero from the Center for Environmental Health, and we're talking about diesel fuel and trucking and how unhealthy this is, and how the truckers are bearing the burden of retrofitting. So now, is the trucking industry regulated by the federal government?
So that's the interesting thing, Beth, is back in the 80s when they were trying to increase competition around trucking, they actually deregulated the trucking industry, and the guys were all declassified and were no longer employees and all became their independent owner-operators and their own little companies. Think of them as their own little company on wheels. Unfortunately, what ended up happening is now there are all these little individual brokers, and they basically, it's kind of a race to the bottom. They basically say, driver A, who will bring this load for the lowest amount? Mm-hmm. So you have, this trucker who's like, oh my gosh, I have to pay for all this gas and maintenance. And he's like, I'll do the load for 60. And this guy will say, I'll do the load for 50. And so you have no regulation, and you have these guys who are like, I'll just do the work. And so there's people getting paid very little for doing a lot of work, and they have no health care insurance, no benefits, that kind of thing. And they all, when we've talked to drivers, they don't want to pollute. Mm-hmm. They have some of the worst health actually sitting in their cabs breathing the bad air. And when they learn about the bad air, that they're spreading in their trucks, they don't want to do it either. They have kids who are dealing with some of the same issues that the communities they drive through are dealing with. Uh-huh. So it's a problem that they don't want to have to, be expanding as well.
That's very sad. Mm-hmm. So what do you? I know you went to Washington D.C. and what were you talking about there? Who were you meeting with, and what was all that?
When we went to D.C., we were meeting with our House representatives. We are starting to roll through the legislature to ask them we need to start re-regulating trucking. We need to put a bottom floor on this and say we need to, have environmental and labor standards for this industry again, that these truck drivers need to be reclassified as employees, that they need to have benefits and wages, and they need to be reorganized into companies so that we can actually have shippers and companies pay for these environmental standards that we need to have in place.
Are people in Washington hearing you?
They are. Mm-hmm. They are hearing us. And there's a huge movement with shows like yours. I think there's generally a shift towards green, and people know that we need to start moving towards a sustainable economy. So the legislature is hearing that. But as you know, the Senate is slow like molasses. But the House is moving, which is really encouraging. So people are hearing it in D.C. We just need to add our voices to that chorus.
Right. Now, there's a lawsuit going on, isn't there, involving the Port of Los Angeles? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the Port of Los Angeles actually were very cutting edge. They had the support of their mayor and their local legislators. They actually tried to make their truck drivers employees, and also tried to instate all these environmental and labor standards at their port. And Port of LA is very large, in the Port of Long Beach. And they did all these standards, but because of the federal regulation, the American Trucking Association, which represents shippers and large companies who didn't want to foot the bill, basically sued and stopped LA from doing all these amazing things around the environment and labor. And so now that's kind of held up in litigation, while the rest of the other ports are like, well, we want to do the right thing as well, but now the ATA is going to sue us too, and we don't want to be sued. And that's why all of us went to DC and are like, you need to change this law so that the rest of the ports can do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Are there plans to have electric trucks? Is that in the horizon, or?
I think that would be so cutting edge, and we should Supernatural Living should tell the companies we want electric trucks. I mean, I think electric rail is probably more on the horizon than electric trucks. But I certainly would I think a lot of us would love to see that closer on the horizon than it actually is, moving that closer. Yeah.
Right.